3 people have been killed in a knife attack in Nice, France. The city's mayor says the evidence so far is pointing to a terrorist attack which happened at the Notre Dame Basilica. The assailant slit a woman's throat and killed a caretaker. Further details are not yet available. It's not the first time that Nice has been the target of an attack. In July 2016, a Tunisian man drove a truck into crowds celebrating Bastille Day, killing 86 people. Earlier this month, a teacher was beheaded outside Paris after showing controversial cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad to some of his pupils. To the UK now. France and Germany are returning to stricter national lockdowns to help combat the second wave of COVID-19 infections. Cases are sweeping across Europe and pressure is mounting on British PM Boris Johnson to do the same. New data shows close to 100,000 new infections in the UK. Our UK correspondent Olly Barratt unpacks this for us now. Olly, so Prime Minister Boris Johnson is under mounting pressure to institute another hard lockdown right across the entire UK as autumn progresses into winter and cases continue to rise. When is he expected to make that tough decision?
It's an ongoing review rather than a time where we know there'll be a decision in either way. Bear in mind also that Boris Johnson's lockdown, if there were to be one, would relate to England. Other parts of the United Kingdom deal with their own rules and regulations, and Wales and Northern Ireland, those nations are already effectively in lockdown. What Boris Johnson's government is saying at the moment, though, is that while it will keep every option on the table, it doesn't currently think that a national lockdown for England is the right move. Bear in mind that around 9 million people in England are already under the government's highest Tier 3 coronavirus lockdown restrictions. So many of those lockdowns that are being announced across the European continent, given the fact that they are slightly weaker than they were the first time around in this pandemic back in March and April, there are actually not many of them that dissimilar to the Tier 3 restrictions that are already in place in parts of England, including the Greater Manchester area, the area around the city of Nottingham, for example. So Boris Johnson's government is saying that's the right approach. You put the strictest measures on the parts of the country where the outbreak is worst, therefore allowing parts of the economy to stay open and up and running, and guarding against the worst damage that a full national lockdown would potentially lead to.
Olly, what are economists speculating would be the outcome or the impact of another hard lockdown?
Well, of course, we saw the impact in the first lockdown in March and April, the biggest hit really to economic growth on record in the UK. And so it would be expected that similar would take place the second time around. One of the potential differences the second time around is that back in March and April, that huge economic support was put in place in the furlough scheme that the government had, where it was paying up to 80% of millions of workers' wages. That is being wound down now. There are other alternative schemes coming online for this next period of the pandemic in the UK, but many economists and many labour unions and businesses are saying that given the way that the support is changing, it's not quite as generous as it used to be. They say that there is the prospect of millions of people becoming unemployed by the turn of the year. So that is part of the reason that the Boris Johnson government, at this point at least, is trying to stick with its regional approach and only putting the strictest lockdown measures on those parts of the country where the virus is spreading most quickly.
Olly, let's move on now. A report into anti-Semitism within the Labour Party is being released today, and it's damning. Of course, most of the allegations against Jeremy Corbyn while he was leader of the Labour Party, but certainly Sir Keir Starmer, the new leader, is going to have to do a lot of fixing to try and get out from under this crisis, as some would say it is. What's been the fallout so far?
Absolutely, and let's deal with Keir Starmer first, the new leader of the Labour Party. His slogan for the Labour Party since he took over is that the party is under new leadership. So that phrase that you mentioned is entirely apposite here, and Keir Starmer is saying that he accepts all of the results of this report in full. He has promised to implement all of the recommendations from the EHRC, which is the Equality and Human Rights Commission. He's saying he'll implement them as soon as possible in the new year. He says he will change the culture of the party. In terms of what the EHRC is saying, the report is saying that allegations of anti-Semitism in Labour were correct, and that the party was responsible for unlawful acts of harassment and discrimination. The report has found serious failings in the party leadership's attempts to tackle anti-Semitism, and that, of course, as you say, relates to the period in which Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party. What is Jeremy Corbyn saying? He says he was always determined to eliminate all forms of racism. He says he regrets it took longer to deliver that change than it should. But he then goes on to say that his Labour Party tried to speed up rather than hinder the process of dealing with anti-Semitism. And he also says he believes that the scale of anti-Semitism in the party has been dramatically overstated for political reasons. Well, critics of Jeremy Corbyn and critics of the anti-Semitism that the EHRC has now confirmed were an element of his Labour Party will say that that was exactly the problem all along, or at least one of the problems was that Jeremy Corbyn would never quite acknowledge the scale of the issue and his role in it, and do enough to deal with it. So going back to where we started, the ball is very much now in Keir Starmer's court in terms of moving the Labour Party on from here. He says he will never allow this kind of anti-Semitism to take hold in the Labour Party ever again.
Olly, Keir Starmer did negotiate a settlement in an anti-Semitism case under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. Does that make his hands equally dirty, or has he been praised for that settlement?
Certainly he will now do the best that he can to separate his leadership of the Labour Party from that of Jeremy Corbyn, and indeed since he took over the leadership of the Labour Party from Jeremy Corbyn, he has been doing that not just on this issue but on issue after issue after issue. He is trying to make it clear that this is a very clean break. But you're quite right, he will face criticism from some, given that he was such a central part of the leadership structure in Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, a very, very senior front-bench figure under Jeremy Corbyn, and so he does face accusations of not having done enough himself through the period leading up to the change in leadership. But he has been very critical of what happened in the past, very critical of Jeremy Corbyn, but it's certainly a difficult period for the Labour Party now to deal with in terms of the attention and the focus on the claims that the EHRC now are saying many of them are entirely correct, and insisting that the Labour Party is guilty of a number of transgressions when it comes to anti-Semitism under the previous leadership of Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very much for that, Olly Barratt.